It is Locked on Jazz for the 9th of July. Will Dwyane Wade change who comes to the Utah Jazz and the players that we can acquire? What is the best position for Donovan Mitchell? Or more importantly, what's the best kind of player to put next to Donovan Mitchell? And how the Phoenix Suns are going to alter the way teams approach roster building. Those are all the things coming up next on Locked on Jazz.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. This week is our first full week of live on YouTube, as well as all of our regular podcast channels for you. It's added a little twist, a little different to the show. Hopefully you're liking it and you can grab the show live. Remember, we will be heading entirely to YouTube here shortly. So if you're listening on Facebook or on Periscope or on Twitch, please go to YouTube and subscribe and follow Locked On Live right now. It will be Locked On Jazz. How are you? Hope everyone's doing well. We'll talk about the NBA Finals in our third segment. We'll take any questions that come in on the live chat room as well coming up. The one question I kind of keep getting everywhere I am, and I always tell our hosts on Locked On to make sure you play the hits. And I think this is the hit that every Jazz fan wants to know, which is Dwyane Wade going to change who the Jazz are able to acquire, our perception of who we are and who the Jazz are able to hire? And I wanted to take kind of a hypothetical run at that, if I could, to open the show today. I thought that's, and it's an interesting question, along the way. Today's show, by the way, is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. Enjoyment isn't the end game, it's the whole game at 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. The first thing is Wade's just presence. So he's at the Sparks Aces game the other day with Damian Lillard and LeBron James. He's at the NBA Finals last night with all the other celebrities. He heads down to the Surfside tragedy in Miami. He does, and leaves a note and pays respects. He's that prominent a person. So the more that Dwyane Wade gets connected to the Utah Jazz and the more prominent he is, the more it does change our perception. So the first question is, does it change the perception of who the Jazz are? And I think unquestionably, both the work that Ryan Smith is doing as an owner and the addition of Dwyane Wade and what that is both, and I think it's important that we don't use the phrase symbolic, because there's actually nothing symbolic about Dwyane Wade's ownership of the Utah Jazz. He is truly doing the work. He is a part of the organization. Ryan Smith talked to him like, you get the whole package. If you're going to be an owner, I'm going to have you actively involved. This is not some thing where we're just going to put you up on billboards. You're going to be engaged, involved, but you're also you got the whole thing. You don't just get the good stuff. You got to deal with all of it. And I'm pretty certain he's tasted that already in this process. So, I think that, in that sense, just that is, I think, the perception of the Jazz as being a different organization in some ways and evolving in a different manner. 100%. There's no question. So the perception of the Utah Jazz, but it's not just perception. It's actually the reality of the Utah Jazz is that Ryan Smith is younger, hipper, more connected, doing amazing things and in the business world, much more flamboyantly, out to the world of a business person than the Millers, who were more kind of home and, quieter. And then that leads to connections like Dwyane Wade. And I'm sure, and the two people below Ryan Smith on the ownership totem pole for the Jazz are incredibly high powered, one out of Australia, one out of Silicon Valley people. I mean, like wildly, crazily successful, but connected and and brilliant business people with every connection in the world. So the Utah Jazz are now in the forefront of that. So all of those things are changing the perception of who the Utah Jazz are. Now, the down and dirty part of it is it going to change who we can acquire as a player? Now, it doesn't give us any cap rules or, anything like that. What it does do, I think, is puts us in the conversation. So I do think Dwyane Wade's presence, coupled with all the other parts of Ryan Smith's ownership, means that when there is a situation in where the money is the same, so now on a buyout or on a mid-level exception or something of that sort, I think you'll have a player be willing to talk to the Utah Jazz who maybe wasn't willing to talk to the Utah Jazz in the past. Now, frankly, Joe Johnson came, right? That was a pretty big moment in franchise history that Joe Johnson came. It's a pretty big moment that Derek Favors returned. We may have paid Derek, more than I think his market was. It doesn't sound like New Orleans was there. I'm not sure he's getting full mid-level. So we brought him back because he brought intrinsic value to us as well as other things, and paid him. But what we're really asking is, we paid Carlos Boozer more. We paid Mehmet Okur more than the market. We may have paid Joe Johnson more than the market. Or at least in that case, there were 3 or 4 players that were on the market. Solomon Hill, I can't remember who the other 2 were. And the Jazz jumped in the right direction. The Jazz jumped aggressively toward Joe Johnson and said to him, like, hey, you're our guy. They did the same thing when Darko Milicic decided to stay. Not Darko Milicic. I've done this twice now. I can't remember his name right now because he's not Darko Milicic. He's a 6'10" shooter that everyone liked who went to Europe and didn't stay. And so we didn't sign him, and we quickly pivoted to Bojan Bogdanovic and were able to sign him. I think we offered Bojan an extra year and more money than anyone else. So the fact is that, it wasn't like our franchise was some taboo, terrible place to be, that if you offered more money with this brilliant head coach and a front office and groups heading in the right direction, that, suddenly nobody wanted to come. That's not where we were. What we haven't been able to get is Nicholas Batum as a buyout candidate. Reggie Jackson, I don't think we tried on a buyout candidate to come to Utah instead of going to LA, Miami, or one of those places on a buyout. Now, Nikola Mirotic, thank you very much. I appreciate the live audience today after yesterday struggling with a live show. It's helpful today. So I think that when you talk about this now, I don't know that we're going to go get somebody who could go to LA instead, right? Like LA is a pretty vastly different place if you're a 32-year-old multimillionaire than Salt Lake City, Utah. Maybe if you have a family and you want to stay, sometimes these buyouts are short. Trevor Booker loved it in Utah. Like we've got the story. It's not a taboo place, but frankly, most teams in the league, Denver's not grabbing, veteran buyout candidates either. So that's where Wade would have the impact to me, is if Dwyane Wade, I think we've reached the level of status where we can be in the conversation already. We've reached the level of status where it's not a taboo place where Ronnie Cycli's like going to ban a trade and Derek Harper is saying, you go to Utah. I think we're over that stage. So the next stage in this process would be, can we reach a level in which a player gets the opportunity and suddenly looks at Quinn Snyder and that coaching staff, looks at Dwyane Wade and Ryan Smith in this ownership, looks at our front office, looks at Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell and says, you know what, that's a better opportunity for me to go decide to go play in Utah than it is to go play for the Clippers or the Lakers or the Denver Nuggets or the Portland Trailblazers. But if we're frank, right, like what we're asking Dwyane Wade's impact to do that when we say that is, will we be different? Is we're actually asking him to do something that Portland is not getting players on a buyout market very often. Denver's not getting players on a buyout market very often. So it's super difficult to go get players on the buyout market. Phoenix acquired Torrey Craig, didn't go get somebody on the buyout market. They made a trade for that player. So if that's where Wade's impact's going to be, that's a steep hill to climb. I think perception and image of the organization is bigger, but that I think still comes back to the same thing we've seen over the years with Carlos and Mehmet and Bojan Bogdanovic, et cetera. In Joe Johnson, if you have more money, you can sign a free agent. If you don't have more money, there's very few circumstances where a player is coming to play with you for less money than he can get somewhere else. That almost never happens. And I think that, I think that is the same thing goes for Mike Conley. Like if we don't offer as much money as everyone else, I don't know that players don't usually stay for less money. Okay. Like Derek didn't take a discount to come back to Utah. He came back to Utah because that was the best money on the table for him. And therefore the situation, which was unique that he wasn't playing as much, was okay. But that's the fact. It has a lot to do with that. So that's my quick take on Dwyane Wade's impact. I think there's a great conversation about Donovan Mitchell that came up earlier this week on our chat of like, is Donovan ready to be point guard? I want to flip the conversation into like what players next to Donovan Mitchell maximize his skills. That would be the conversation that I want to have with you coming up here on a Friday edition of Locked On Jazz, live as well, coming to you as we on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter. As I mentioned, please go subscribe to Locked On Live, which will become Locked On Jazz on YouTube, because this will eventually only be up on YouTube for you, but certainly glad to have you in whatever format you're listening to us right now. All right, today's show is brought to you by my good friends over at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. It is Murdoch Hyundai with the great lineup of cars. I'm driving the Sonata right now. I just finished with the Elantra. The sedans, I talk so much about the SUVs. We've purchased 2 of them. So that's probably why I make so many comments about that. We've purchased the Santa Fe twice, but I'm driving the Elantra, and I drove the Elantra, which was the North American Car of the Year, and I've told you a lot about it. I was just blown away. $26,000 was the car I was driving. It was just incredible. I'm now driving the Sonata, and it is the nicer version of the sedan, and it's a great family car. It's big. It could fit 5 easily. The gas mileage is fabulous. It's really incredible, the cars they've made and how solid they are. The SUV lineup is amazing. Kona, Tucson, Santa Fe, and Palisade. They've got some hybrids and some electrics for you. I drove the Kona electric the other day. It was cute and fun, and certainly did all the things you wanted electric cars. And the sedans are the Elantra and the Sonata. It's all at Murdoch Hyundai at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. And if you get a chance, go ahead and just email me at dlock09@gmail.com. That's dlock09@gmail.com. And I'll set you up with a meeting over there and give you a first-class VIP experience at any of the 3 Murdoch locations. Have you ordered your Grasshopper Cookie Bar protein bar from Built Bar yet? The Grasshopper Cookie Bar with real cookie pieces. It's the Thin Mint cookie of protein bars. The Grasshopper Cookie is available, 100% real chocolate, 100% delicious. Only available for a limited time. I've already made my order of 2 boxes. They have been shipped and they will be arriving. 130 calories, 2.5 fat grams, 4 net carbs, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. It's one of the special flavors at Built Bar. Jump on it now. It's Grasshopper Cookie with the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15. You get 15% off. That's LOCKED15. I think there's been some confusion on that. At least that's what my emails have told me. So want to make sure you have that right. LOCKED15 at built.com. All right. So Donovan Mitchell's incredible. And it's an interesting question of like, what is the right player to play next to Donovan Mitchell? Now, let me make sure that the right player for the Jazz probably to have next to Donovan Mitchell is Mike Conley, because he's the best player that we can easily acquire. But I'm just kind of wondering, like, if you were just putting a player next to the 25-year-old Donovan Mitchell, who, really is capable of averaging 30 points a game at some point here, if you want to let him. What is the best player? So there's a bunch of different schools of thought on this. On one level, he's incredible. He averaged 32 points, 4 rebounds, and 6 assists in the postseason. So, over an 82 game schedule, can he put out that kind of effort and score 30? I don't know, but I think he probably could. So there's a few things on Donovan. So one, on a defensive side of things, it'd be great to go get a big, physical 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" guard that plays next to Donovan that you can match up on the opposing team's point guard and let Donovan hide a little bit. Okay. So that would be great. With that sprained ankle, Donovan was not a particularly good defensive player in the playoffs. Like, he also, you listen to Dame Lillard yesterday in his media session for the Olympics, and Dame Lillard says, I'm excited to not have as big an offensive role and be able to show people I'm a good defensive player. Like, there's no question that when you have to carry the offensive load that a Dame Lillard or Donovan Mitchell that you're resting on the defensive end. Like, that's reality. You can't do it any other way. Devin Booker was doing that for a long time and still probably is. And he's had his burden relieved by having this incredible, one of the 4 great point guards of all time, next to him in how he's playing. And that, I think helps him offensively. Donovan is 6'1", and so there's some limitations on what he can do as a shooting guard offensively. But so we start defensively. That's my answer defensively. From a defensive standpoint, the perfect scenario next to Donovan is some massively long player that can go grab and guard their number 1 option. Royce O'Neal can guard their number 1 or 2 option, and Donovan can slide over and guard somebody who's, a spot up shooter and rest defensively. That's the ideal if you're putting Donovan Mitchell, if you're building a roster, just ignoring salary cap and everything else, of what would be the best thing you could put next to Donovan Mitchell from a defensive standpoint. That's easy. From an offensive standpoint, I actually don't know. I think it's a tribute to how great Donovan is that this answer is not easy. It might be irrelevant. He's that good offensively. So there's 2 sides to the story. One is, do you want to have like a CJ McCollum next to him the way Dame Lillard does, so that when they double team and try to take the ball out of your hands, you have somebody who can make a play and can really shoot it and create himself. And frankly, what Mike Conley can do, that if the Clippers could not, every time Reggie Jackson got on Donovan, they brought a double. They couldn't have done it if Mike Conley was on the floor in that series, because of the fact that he, that's the way he, it gives you another ball handler, another shooter, and now you're playing 4-on-3. So, that's what Dame Lillard's had in CJ McCollum all this time. And in one sense, that seems like the perfect answer. Like another shooter, another ball handler, relieve the burden from Donovan so he doesn't have to, when he's double teamed, another scorer. That seems like a perfect. The other answer to me, though, is a true point guard, because the one thing on Donovan that I think is really interesting is that he's just one of the great shooters in the league. And you frankly could run Klay Thompson, Kyle Korver, Devin Booker, weak side pin down actions for him, get him going. When Donovan's had a hard time, Quinn's done a nice job along the way of freeing Donovan by giving him the advantage off the ball. And I actually think sometimes that more of that would be better for Donovan. If he doesn't have the burden of bringing the ball up, he doesn't have to make that decision. You have a point guard who brings it up. You hit Donovan on a pin down, so the pick and roll's almost started. He either works it into a catch and shoot 3 the way Klay Thompson would, or he works it into a low pick and roll the way a Chris Paul or Devin Booker does. And he's playing with advantage. He's working in that level. And I want a true point guard who's making those kind of plays for him and then can shoot back out. And then that's Mike Conley at his perfection. The other idea is kind of that you actually want a really good shooter. This kind of goes back to your big defender shooter type player, so that Donovan's playing point guard. That really you're running high pick and roll with Donovan most of the time. The game, Kevin Arnovitz and Kevin Pelton wrote an article about this on ESPN this week, that the game's gotten very much to that, that you end up with a point guard who, or some high pick and roll on every play instead of running it off the manner which I'm talking about it. You could still do both with Donovan, frankly, is that Donovan, when you want to, I think, and we did plenty of it, but Donovan ran 33% of our pick and rolls this year. I think Joe ran about 33% and Mike ran about 33%. That might not be entirely right, but that's close. Like, I think when it got right down to it, like by the end of the year with Mike's injuries and everything else. And so that's not a per game number. That's for the season number. That's the way it came out by the end of the years. I think Donovan, the actual answer on our pick and rolls is Donovan ran 28%, Joe ran 22%, Mike ran 22%, and Jordan Clarkson ran 14%. Donovan ran about 2,000 pick and rolls, Joe ran about 1,600, and Mike ran about 1,600. Do you want that number? So let's say out of out of just kind of doing a quick scan of that, there's about 6,000 pick and rolls available for the Jazz in this season. Do you suddenly want that number for Donovan to be 4,000 instead of 2,000? And he just becomes your point guard. Chris Paul ran 3,100 this year. Devin Booker ran 1,600. Cameron Payne ran 1,000. Let's like the guy who, I would assume that Trae Young ran the most pick and rolls of anyone in the league, and he ran 4,000. Donovan ran the 8th most amount of pick and rolls. So it's not like Donovan was short in this. He ran 2,000 pick and rolls this year, which is the 8th most. He's running 46 of them per 100 possessions. And the next tier would be you're changing Donovan from a 2,000 point guard pick and roll player a year to 3,000. Really, that's the jump. So you're adding another 10 or 12 pick and rolls a game for Donovan because you're moving him as the primary ball handler. He's now in Dame Lillard, Chris Paul, Luka Doncic, Trae Young category. Like that's now how he's playing. John Morant will probably be there shortly. And right now he's not. Right now we spread it out a little bit more. So is that the answer? And that's probably the simplest way to look at it. Like, I don't know on Donovan. I mean, yes, I think he probably could run 3,000 pick and rolls in a season. I also think he's one of the great shoot. Every time he's got the ball in his hands, he can't play catch and shoot. And he's the number 2 catch and shoot player in the NBA over the last 4 years. If I want more out of Donovan, I probably want some more wide pin downs where he's getting the ball out on the wing on a catch and shoot off a pick where they're going under or they're switching Rudy's setting the pick. And so they're big drops, and Donovan comes with a catch and shoot, squaring his shoulders with his incredible strength and playing in that little bit Devin Booker-esque way more than Chris Paul-esque. But it's an interesting question. So that's, I think, the defensive one's really simple. You just want a big, huge physical guy you can put next to him, which then leads you to he's running 3,000 pick and rolls a game, and he's just dominating the ball in that way. And then gets to another question of whether, he's got the passing skills to be able to do that. At 6'1", those passing skills are hard. This is where Trae Young is truly brilliant. And, Chris Paul is obviously great. And then Luka's at 6'9". He can find any window you want. And so he just, question of whether or not Donovan can evolve his passing game, which I think seems to be getting better and better every year. Donovan just evolves. He gets better and better every year. So interesting discussion kind of on what's best for Donovan. I think for the Jazz right now, the best answer is Mike Conley because that's what you have available to you. But if you don't get Mike Conley, then maybe you are shifting Donovan to a 3,000 pick and roll point guard a season and making a move. And then let's just be honest about what the next conversation has to be. If Mike Conley's market goes big and is suddenly $30 million point guard for 2 or 3 years at 32 years old, how much worse are you if Donovan Mitchell's playing point guard running 3,000 pick and rolls a year, and he's become Dame Lillard for your team offensively? And what can you do to build around it with limited cap space? Are you actually maybe better? Because that third year at 30 million, even that second year at 30 million could be really dramatically bad for the Jazz. So those are some interesting conversations there for you to look at. Let's look at what the line says now at betonline.ag after game 2 of the finals. I've got some thoughts on that, and I'll take your questions as well. Phoenix was really super last night. Phoenix is now a minus 475 to win the NBA title. Wow. The Phoenix Suns total, Milwaukee's got to beat them 4 out of 5. It's almost impossible at this point. In the U19s, by the way, Turkey is a 9.5 point favorite over Japan today, and Serbia is ahead of Argentina. In the WNBA, you can play. The Aces and the Lynx play. The Storm continue. They're going up. It's Sue Bird versus Diana Taurasi in the OG matchup. Major League Baseball continuing as well. And then there's some NBA draft first round bets you can make that are taking place. And you can also get involved with all the baseball stuff that's taking place. The Giants, the surprise story, great Midwest rivalry today with the Cubs and the Cardinals with a 12:20 first pitch. That you might want to jump on. It's all at betonline.ag. Promo code Locked On gets you a 50% welcome bonus. That's a 50% welcome bonus on at betonline.ag. That, by the way, gives you, free money. Dodgers, Astros, White Sox, Padres, Mets are still the 5 favorites to win the World Series in Major League Baseball right now, according to betonline.ag. Dodgers, Astros, White Sox, Padres, and the Mets. All right, let's get some of your questions. Also, I want to talk about Phoenix. There's a lot of talk out there about Lonzo Ball, which is interesting. He is, I think, a restricted free agent, if I remember correctly. And there's also a lot of talk about don't bring his dad. I got to be honest with you. Like, I'm tired of that talk. Like, why? The guy was right. Like, the guy was loud and rambunctious and obnoxious and all these things about, his kids and what he's right. Like, he just had the Rookie of the Year. He just had another one. Like, he's right. He built 2 NBA players. And, like, he's branded himself. Like, what is so wrong? I find nothing wrong with LeVar Ball, honestly. Like, and I think that actually, I think we should be careful on what we're analyzing there. So I find nothing. I think it's very interesting. I'll leave this for a deep thought for you. Active African-American, active Black parents of athletes get depicted in unusually negative landscape by predominantly white media over the years. Richard Williams is a great example of this with Venus and Serena. I mean, he really raised 2 incredible women athletes, but also business people. And they didn't crack. Well, Tracy Austin, Clenning Bassett, every other young Jennifer Capriati cracked. Yet no one was ever blasting their parents the way Richard Williams got annihilated in the media. So just chew on that one for a little bit and see what you think of it. You can think it's wrong. Yeah, here's what David's. I think Don is better off the ball. We need someone who can initiate the offense. I think Don is overused, too much dribbling, not enough running the offense. He's a scorer, not a facilitator. Interesting. Del Toledo says with his daily drop-in, I saw a CJ McCollum for Clarkson Ingles pick. Seems like perfect. I don't see why the Blazers would do the deal. The Blazers would do the deal because they get bigger. We'd be really small. I'm assuming that means we're not re-signing Mike Conley at that point. Here's a, hey, Locke, is Lonzo a possibility as a free agent if Mike leaves? Good size, good defender, good playmaker, and now Lonzo's shooting much better. We don't have the money to be able to offer them a deal that would get Lonzo Ball. Lonzo Ball's a restricted free agent, so any offer we make, they would be able to match. He's going to want $25 million. We don't have any way to come up with a $25 million deal. Over on Twitch, but make sure you please make sure you do grab over at YouTube, please, and subscribe. I like the idea of Donovan hiding on the defensive end, but in order to be more than an all-star, he needs to be stronger and quicker defensive player. Yeah, maybe in the playoffs. I mean, honestly, part of this is getting through 82 games, and the load management conversations about is incorrect. Watch an NBA game today. Follow a player on the defensive end for 10 straight possessions and watch how much they have to move, rotate, shift, change, close out. Go watch an NBA game from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago and watch the same thing. It's astronomically different what we're asking out of our players against better athletes. And that's why the injuries are up. So, yeah, maybe Donovan in the playoffs needs to be a better defensive player, but I'm not about to criticize Donovan's defense, which wasn't very good in Game 6 against the Clippers when he's playing on one leg. Like, that I would tell you is, so right? Do you hear me? Spencer Morgan over on YouTube. What's best for Donovan is putting a guard next to him that is lengthy, wing defender, ball handling would be a huge plus with that too. Hey, and if he could shoot, and if he could beat you one-on-one, and then he's Paul George. No, Spencer's right. I mean, this is a really good discussion, and that's the opinion, on what you think is the answer for what's best next to Donovan. And as I said, I actually don't know. I mean, an all-star, which we have in Mike Conley, is probably the best, right? So the idea that I just presented 2 different cases and they're not dramatically different, and then it's probably just the answer is whoever the best player you can get, right? Like if it's like if I can go get Reggie Bullock and play him next to Donovan, playing Mike Conley next to Donovan's better because Mike Conley's better. right? Like that's better. Spencer Dinwiddie says he wants a 5-year, $125 million deal. We don't have any real way to get him that 5-year, $125 million deal. But it's an interesting thing. All right. Few thoughts on the Sun. Dinwiddie's interesting to me. Like he's big, he's long, he's coming off an ACL. He's not actually athletic. But he's got some things that are kind of fun to that. Few thoughts on last night. I think the Suns have just played brilliantly. I mean, they've just been brilliant. And we all want to talk about how we should be the Suns. At this point, I'm actually just tipping my hat. They've just been absolutely great. They are making every big shot. They don't have a weakness. They're putting 240 minutes of quality NBA basketball out on the floor the whole time. Booker was incredible last night. That was their shot-making night. They're 20 of 40 from three, so they won one with shot-making. And boy, Milwaukee, the minute Giannis was not on the floor for a little while because he cramped, and the minute Drew Holiday went out for a little while, which I think was just regular rotation, not because of 2 fouls like Mark Jackson said, they just have these lulls. Milwaukee just does not give 240 minutes of effort out there. Like, it's interesting to watch. And there was a play in each of the last 2 nights have been plays where guys have not run back defensively. And then interesting number, Phoenix is 13-0 when they have a 10-point lead. And that's just because they do not have weaknesses. They do not put bad lineups on the floor. Their effort is remarkable. Every single one of their players is at least average offensive, as we talked about earlier this week on points gained. So really, I think they've just been wildly impressive. That's my take. All right. That wraps up the week. Thank you very much. Hope everyone's great. Thank you for those of you who listened to 3 episodes or more this week. I appreciate the loyalty. Tell your friends to do so as well. It leads for better conversations over the weekend about the NBA if they listen to the show. Have a great one. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you Monday. I'm out and about everywhere for the next 4 weeks at various golf tournaments or meetings in Virginia or vacation in Hawaii. So I'm going to try to get as many shows out as I can, but it could be a little funky. So I'll do the best I can. Maybe I'll just do them from the deck in Hawaii with a backdrop of the ocean and still do live shows and then see if my wife leaves me. And that would be bad. All right. See you guys. Talk to you soon.